everyone. And I am here again with another interview with the Becoming Witch series. And today I'm going to be speaking with Kat.
Hi.
And as if you've been watching these interviews, you are aware that I am speaking with witches who are going or have gone through or who are going through a time of transition or stagnation in their craft. And we're just trying to get different perspectives on how that affects our witchcraft. Because as you know, everybody goes through these sort of situations in their life. So, Kat, why don't you begin by telling us how you actually either fell upon or came into or started studying witchcraft?
Okay. So, I guess I should mention I'm from the Philippines, so we have a really different way of viewing witchcraft. So I grew up with zero superstition, zero ghost stories, zero witchy stories. It was something my mom kept very far away from me because of superstitions that she had. So I grew up knowing nothing. And I went to an international school. And at one point I was 11 and I used to hang out at the library. I was one of those weird, quiet kids. And I was friends with an older classmate who was probably 2 grades older, something like that. And she just approached us randomly one day and asked us, "Hey, do you know witchcraft?" And myself and my friend were both just like, "No." And I don't even think Harry Potter was out yet or was really well known in the Philippines. So we were just both like, "What's that?" Like, "No, we don't know." And she told us the basics, like it was magic, you could make stuff happen, you could be witches. And we're just like, "Oh yeah, awesome." 2 11-year-old girls. So she actually gave us a website. It was called spellsandmagic.com. I still remember it. It was a hodgepodge of different spells, things about astral projection, spirits, a few things from like the Wiccan path, a bunch of other things about circles and angels and all of these things. And I got into it. My friend did it. She was just like, "Huh," and then left. I had already seen or had started seeing ghosts since I was 6. So the fact that there was this magic world and then a spirit world that made sense to compared to what I was already seeing, that started it. So at 11, I started researching. I didn't tell anyone. That was where I first learned the words like witchcraft and magic and like how to protect myself and what a spirit was, what the difference between spirits and demons and all of these things. And from then, it just kind of grew and grew and grew. I would say that I dabbled for like the first 10 years of my life because there wasn't much information at that time as to how to make it a full part of your life. It was just kind of this thing where you saw spells online.
Right.
And used the basics. So yeah, that's how I found it.
Well, being 11, I'm sure, being 11, I unless you were brought up with parents who are witches or close family members who are witches, I feel like dabbling and trying and experimenting is expected at such a young age, especially if there is this, it's secret or there's so many superstitions about it. What can you share with us just a couple of like what are some of the superstitions surrounding witchcraft for you there in the Philippines?
Sure. So here in the Philippines, it's a very Catholic-based country. So a lot of it is viewed as evil, devil worship, devil work. We don't commonly call it witchcraft. You could translate it into that. But we have 2 versions depending where you're from, either from the north or the south. So from the north, it's often called mangkukulam. From the south, it's often called mangbabarang. And these are the evil styles. And I'm using quotation marks for these because the church considers it evil, the Catholics consider it evil, but it's witchcraft. And the superstition behind that is you sell your soul, the old school superstition. You sell your soul to either the devil or one of our really evil mythical Filipino creatures, and they give you a book or they give you a stone to swallow, and that'll give you the power. Yeah. So we have a weird thing with swallowing stones in the Philippines. We have a superhero called Darna that gets her powers from swallowing a stone. That also overlays to things called the gimats in the Philippines. So that's a big stereotype that you're evil, you sell your soul, you have to make a contract, and you have something physical that gives you the power. It's not like from you.
Right. Wow.
It's pretty heavy.
Well, it's really interesting to me. That the concept of swallowing a stone is really interesting. It's almost like having a familiar inside of you, or swallowing the familiar, which gives you the power. So again, it's the idea that the power isn't something you have; it's something that you have to be given. That's really interesting. So, so that was your first introduction to actually find witchcraft. Ooh, what is this? Was at 11. Do you mind if I ask how long ago that was for you?
Math.
Well, how old are you now, if that's easier?
I'm turning 27, so I think that's 16
like
years.
16 years. Yeah, that's yeah. That's more than half your life.
Yeah, pretty much. It's funny, like looking back, because I didn't think anything of it. It was just like, yeah, this is it. This is me.
Wow. So when did you when did you realize, was it that early that you were a witch, that this was something that you were, or did it take some time after that for you to really figure that out?
It definitely took time. I never acknowledged that I was a witch or that I was pagan until I was, I think, like the moment that I went, yeah, I accept it. I was 21, I think.
Okay.
So it was years after. But as a kid, I never questioned it. It's like, yeah, I can do this. I can see spirits. I can do these things that no one can explain. But I never labeled myself. It was just kind of like, yeah. I was very accepting as a child.
Well, I think as children, it's easier to accept things, right?
That's true, without a label and everything, yeah.
So if we look at the time when you did identify as witch and you were actually actively practicing some sort of craft, what did that look like for you? Did you have a label for it, or how would you describe it?
I started off the way I think a lot of modern witches started off as, which was very Wiccan. So my first introduction to like witchcraft as part of your life, ritual type stuff, something that I could incorporate, was through Wicca. Okay. And I think that was because I found Tumblr, and Wicca's like one of the bigger hashtags on Tumblr. So I'm just like, okay, yeah, that's me. I agree with a lot of it. And I jumped. I really just jumped straight into it. So my start was very to the book. I had my altar exactly how it was shown, like on all of your Wicca websites. I had the chalice. I had made a god and goddess figure out of air dry clay.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, so I had everything. I had an old knife from my father. So I'm like, okay, that's my athame. And I got this and I got that. So it was very much the aesthetic. I had to be by the book.
So were you doing rituals? Were you actually casting circle and invoking the elements and all that?
Yes, the full thing, which always felt awkward. It was just something like, yeah, this is what witches do. I will do it. And just kind of did it. And I have to admit, I mean, the aesthetic is something else. It's fun to look back and be like, wow, I was so witchy with quotation marks, because it was that. And I loved that feeling at first. But yeah, it was full on ritual. I had cakes and even wine set aside for that. Like I would have a budget just for that.
Wow. So you were really like immersed in it. So for something, and we're talking, in the beginning, for something that just started as something you were totally unaware of. And even if we look at it now, because, looking back at what we first did, even if it was the aesthetic that drew you to it, it sounds like you were really invested in doing your craft.
Mm-hmm. I really was, because in my brain, the setup was so it was ritualistic. It reminded me of elements from like church when I used to go to church. So to me, that made it real. That made it like, yes, this is a real thing. This is what modern day witchcraft is. And of
Right.
course, when you look at like altars that people post online, there are these beautiful, magnificent altars. And I'm like, yep, goals. That is it.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, because I grew up Roman Catholic, so my
Mhm.
my first rituals it was like a mass. I
Yep.
mean, you did almost everything the priest did in a mass. So of course,
Mhm.
it gives it that validation if you're unaware of other things. So
Mhm.
um, so your usual practice was, I usually at this point go into what your normal day as a witch it looks like. But if you were very much Wiccan, I'm sure you followed the Wheel of the Year. You must have
Yes.
done
I
Sabbat.
did terribly. I did terribly at that.
Oh, did you?
I yes. I grew up just like any other Filipino, like Christmas is huge here. You start preparing for Christmas as early as like August for some people, September for the others.
Wow.
So you'll start hearing Christmas music come around. There's a meme where we have a celebrity who's most well known for his Christmas songs. We'll literally have a meme once September comes along. You'll just see his head like at the very corner of a picture or something, and he'll like slowly emerge. It happened. So when I started trying to do the Sabbats and everything, the Espits are a little easier because like full moons are pretty, and I
Mhm.
was always attracted to the full moon. But the Sabbats were so strange to me, and I never really liked celebrating like extravagant parties. So the idea of doing these big things just for this one specific day and setting time apart for that was a little difficult, and I never fully got the hang of it.
Okay. So then
Yeah.
what would a typical day in your witchy life, what would that look like if we were to have peeked in at Kat way back when she was practicing?
Back then, so I'd start my day and I either a little morning prayer. So like my brain would still be foggy and be like, okay, must pray. And I would pray and I would have this memorized prayer, which I don't do anymore because it was memorized. And then I'd get out of bed and then I do like sun salutation to the best of my ability. And I remember having so much trouble because I had just woken up, but I did it. And then I'd go down and have breakfast, whatever it is. So with my meals, I tried my best to pray before meals, which was a leftover from like Catholic life. And I
Yeah.
would offer up part of the food for the deity. So I would leave food over, which also is very strange as a Filipino because we're taught to clean our plates. And throughout regular day, not too much. I was working full time by the time that I really got into it. So it started again when I would head back home and I would have, if I took a bath, I would focus on like cleansing off whatever negativity, toxicness has stuck to my body. And then before sleep, I would close with another prayer. If I could light incense or a candle, I would, but not always, just because incense was kind of expensive. It
Yeah.
still is. So there, and I would end with a prayer and then go to sleep.
So when you were doing your prayers,
So
who
yeah,
were you
it
praying
was a lot.
to?
Um, I at first I had thought it was God and goddess, but I actually very quickly found two deities that jumped out literally at me. So when I was researching Wicca, I had read at one point that you, instead of God and goddess, you could be encouraged to look for specific deities. I'm like, okay, that sounds a little easier because just going for God and goddess felt very odd for me, just because I was trying to distance myself from Catholicism.
Yeah.
Didn't feel right. And I started looking at pictures, and I had two pictures where the deities actually moved. And I saw the image move, and that was for Chernonas and Arianrod, where the images moved. And I was just like, and I didn't believe it. And I checked online, and like apparently that was a thing where they reach out to you. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, cool. And that was a big thing for me. I was so excited because I didn't have any interaction with deity before that.
Right.
So that was like the first thing. Yeah. So there I did focus on two specific deities at the time. And then I also kind of generalized it to universe and etc.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. So you're practicing. This is what your practice is looking like, and this is what you're doing. So what led to the transition and or stagnation in your practice? What sort of led into that?
Okay. So I was Wiccan for only a couple of months, and I transitioned into eclectic paganism because I found it fit better since I didn't agree with a lot of the things. And after that was pretty smooth. And I think late 2018, I started to rethink my practice because I'm like, I can't deal with the big rituals anymore. It's too tiring. Just like having to set up and everything is starting to not feel quite right. And in 2019, I actually moved to France. So I'm half French, half Filipino, and I tried to move to Paris to work. Didn't work out. And within that time, I couldn't bring all of my ritual stuff. I couldn't bring all the things I would put on my altar. I couldn't bring all my incense, my herbs, and everything. So that was when I had to really think about what my craft had become. And I started to go back to just the bare bones. I did ritual with just me sitting there with a few things in my hands. I didn't cast a full-on circle anymore. I tried to really step away and regroup. And it felt good. At the same time, I also pushed it because I started doing spell work for people to help, with the income and everything. So I started doing spells for other people. And I learned a new way of doing spells that I never really thought of before. It just kind of happened. And then things went stagnant. Like once I was getting into like a role and I started learning like, okay, I can do this, I can do this, I can do that. And then I felt it just stop. And for a while I was like, okay, that's odd. So I stopped doing spell work for others and something still felt off. So I realized I hadn't been chatting with the deities that I have been working with over the past few years. So I would be like, yeah, good morning, good night, but not anything proper. And they're very gentle with me, luckily. So my pantheon has grown. So I have, I now also worship Mother Earth, also Lucifer, Cernunnos, and Arianrod, the two mains, and then Loki. So when I tuned in, I essentially got primarily Mother Earth just going, shaking her head. And I got a bit of reprimanding as to, in their words, rolling down the hill without stopping. So I had to kind of sit back, and I am literally at ground one, rebuilding everything. I haven't done a full-on proper ritual since, I think that was probably September last year. So I've been building up, looking over my beliefs, my practices, everything since then. So it was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So the biggest, so if we look at your spirituality, your witchcraft, and we look at what was going on sort of like in the mundane aspect of your life, if anything is mundane, I happen to think everything is magical anyway. There was a physical transition for you, Philippines to France. That's got the energy just of the two different places has got to be different.
Mm-hmm. It really was. Even the Fae, that was probably the biggest surprise. I'm very used to seeing our Fae here, primarily what we call duendes, which are like little people. I don't know what they would call it abroad. I think they're more keen to like brownies and things like that. They tend to be more mischievous, not someone you want to mess with because most of our...
Are they kind of like this?
Some do look like that. I used to have a bunch of those visiting me when I was a kid. Similar. They're similar. So there are some that are very much like that. And there are some that kind of look like Snow White dwarves, but
really?
like on a shorter scale. Yeah. Huh. So they look very like cute and like, hey, but If you yeah, like they're great. You're great. I have a bunch of them that live next door. So they're great. It's just that when you mess with them, it's like, no.
Right.
So I was very used to how they look here, which is they look more like leaves and bushes and like the land. What I
Right.
noticed in France is they looked more like flowers. They looked more soft and flowy and flowery. They had more slender bodies.
Wow.
And it was so weird. When I saw the first one, I was just like, what's that? It's like, oh. And I didn't know how to process because I'm like,
Right.
that is Disney. So it's a thing. They really look different. So that should have been a clue that I should have rested and
Right.
reevaluated at that point. But nah, I'm dense.
So are you still in France?
Nope, moved back to the Philippines last October because things did not work out, which timing because COVID and everything.
Right. So you are actually in the middle of transitioning. You're in the middle of evaluating and reestablishing yourself now?
At the moment, I'm rebuilding. So I've been instructed off of it. I already know what my rituals will look like, what my Sabbats will look like, but I've been instructed to write everything down.
Okay.
Before I even try to start it, because that's how my brain works. I like having like a plan in place, so it works, and I'm being good and I'm following the instructions.
Okay. So, I mean, knowing kind of, since you've evaluated and you're in the process of writing down what your practice is actually going to include, are there things from your previous practice that you're going to be carrying over into your new reestablished practice?
Somewhat. Certain basic ideas, yes. For example, altar setup. I still like the idea of an aesthetically pleasing altar, but more to my eyes rather than a Wiccan ideal. Right. So that I'm definitely bringing over. I just realized something else that has to transition. I actually broke my very first chalice, which was a little crystal wine glass that one of my deities chose. It broke. So that was a thing that I was really holding on to. And now I have to figure out what to replace it with. If I even need it in my practice, I want it because I'm attached. Right. So I'm bringing over some parts of the altar. I still like the idea of a circle, but not just a circle. My technique now, and I've tested this out already, is to create a safe space within the room. So using the walls that are already existing as the barrier and then extending that out to the property lines of my home. So making it more, I don't know, like a fortress rather than a circle.
Right.
So that. And Sabbats, I definitely want to experience a year without trying to experience Sabbats, which is this year, and seeing which ones I'm naturally drawn to.
Right.
I 100% know that Samhain is something that I will 100% be celebrating because that's the easiest one and I love that one. But for the others, I'm trying to test it out. I don't want to have like notifications reminding me like, hey, this is a thing. Right. I want to see if I'm feeling a change because obviously here in the Philippines, we don't have the 4 seasons. Right. We have hot and wet and hotter. Right now we're in hotter. So, and it's raining.
That makes perfect sense to me. I mean, I didn't move to a different country, but moving across country, the climate is different, the energy, the land, the spirits of the land. I mean, I can totally relate to a lot of what you're talking about, and needing to readjust and reevaluate and then build from the basis. And that makes perfect sense to me. What things are you like, maybe just not? You just know already that the things that you did, you just know. Yeah, no, I'm not doing that.
Full on ritual, like by the book, this is how you start and end work. I love following instructions. So when something's written down and it says like, this is how you do it, I will follow those instructions. I'm the person, if you give me furniture and there's instructions that come with it, I'm following it 100%. So pulling myself away from that is probably the hardest, but 100% is that. So I'm not going to be starting it the way that I used to with, I'll still cleanse my room, but whether I go counterclockwise or clockwise, I'm not going to beat myself up about that. Whether I have a full flowery speech for the elements, it just depends on how I'm feeling that day, as long as I'm being respectful, those kinds of things. That's probably the biggest change. Same thing with the Sabbaths. I can't cook. So
that's a big change, though, for someone who is very comfortable in structure, going to something that is a lot more spontaneous. That's a huge, I know, that's a huge transition to make.
So it came at the right time too, because my current job at the moment, my jobs used to be so stagnant. It was a routine. So my witchcraft kind of mirrored that. My job is completely different now. It's spontaneous. Things can change in a heartbeat, and my craft is now adjusting to that. So thanks, but still stress.
So do you still start your days with prayer? Do you still do cleansings? Do you still do like the typical things like that? Is that still part of your practice?
Yes, but now it's more organic and less, I'm awake, I have to pray right now.
Right.
It's more of, I wake up, I stretch, I scroll Instagram and YouTube and everything, and I do more stretches. I chill out, and I live in a 2-story house, so my altar is in my bedroom. It's a little simple altar, a pretty little box with two, what's it called? A figurine of like some skulls and some dried flowers, a little bowl of water because my chalice broke. I have my crystal set aside, and then a little candle. And for me now, when I start my prayers, it's when I naturally start my day instead of forcing it out of me the moment I wake up. So I'll go downstairs, I'll bring the little bowl, I'll dump out the old water, wash my face, brush my teeth, just really chill, fill up the little bowl, bring it up, and I'll have my prayers. And my good mornings are always the same, because I always say good morning to each of my deities by name. But then the rest of it is no longer a memorized speech. It's what I feel like I want to say today, whatever I want to add. And I leave the candle burning for a few minutes. I get ready for the day, change, brush my hair, whatever it is. And I'll snuff the candle and head down when I'm ready. So it's more relaxed, for sure.
So
oh, sorry.
That's okay. I'm sorry. There's just a little bit of a lag. So are you doing spell work for others again, or is that something that you still haven't brought back?
I haven't brought it back yet. I'm doing divination for others, which never stopped. I was allowed to continue that because my tarot cards specifically, I've always enjoyed it, and my deities don't really control the feelings of my tarot cards, so they have their own little section. Spellcraft for other people, however, is on hold for the entire 2020. Those are the specific instructions. So the entire 2020, no spells for anyone else. If I want to do it for myself, I can. I haven't done so far. And for when it does start back up, when I do spells for others, it will no longer be spells which involve me taking the first step. So it can be enchantments, charms, like simple protections, things like that for the person requesting it. But unlike before, where I did justice spells, where I would aim directly at a third party and be like, okay, you can't do this, you can't do that, anything like that. Those are the ones I have to stop. So I primarily did those types of spells anyway, because it's what my clients wanted, and I knew how to do it. So I did it. So it wasn't really something that I loved. What I love is the protection spells, the charms, the enchantments, because that's where I feel like that bubbling energy that I love. So that's a pretty big change as well.
Now, you mentioned I thought I heard you say that you weren't doing spell work for yourself either this year.
Unless I absolutely need to. So before, I was a little too reliant. I would find even the most basic reason to make a full-on ritual. And I don't mean like, hey, I'm gonna make a sigil and then burn it and I'm good. No, to burn a sigil, I would make a full-on circle.
Oh, that's right.
And everything.
Sort of like a Wiccan base, so everything is done in that. Yeah. That can be, that's a big production there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. There's a production. That's exactly it. So I've still done like smaller things, like burning bay leaves when I feel the need, simple cleansing, simple like pop-up protections, as I call them, but nothing that required me to do a full-on ritual. And it's funny because the old me would have been like, yeah, I have to set a time. Okay, full moon's coming up, new moon's coming up. Now it's just kind of like, I want to do it right now. I'm gonna do it right now.
Right.
So
that's like I said, that's a big, and that's a big difference. That's just that in itself is a big difference. So what advice would you have for someone, another witch, who might be going through some sort of transition, whether it's, moving, changing jobs, or anything in their life that is, maybe they're very structured and now they're feeling as if it's going to be more spontaneous. What would your advice be to that witch?
Take a breath. Stop and take a proper breath, not like and go again, but to literally, like, a full day would be amazing, but even just like 10 minutes to just sit and think, do I feel comfortable in this? Am I actually happy with this? What type of nerves am I feeling? To really look into yourself and check. Because for me personally, I always felt that I was excited about the things I was doing, but it was more anxious. It was more anxiety. Like, am I doing it right? So it took a while to notice it. So for anyone else who's kind of feeling that push and pull between two areas, just take a breath, fully breathe, and listen, because it's surprising how much you already know you want, but kind of ignore, just for the sake of other people, for aesthetics, or whatever else it may be.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Thank you.
That's good advice. Yeah, so thank you for talking with me, Kat, and for sharing your experience, because that's, for at least for me, I totally resonate with everything you've discussed here. And for those of you who have watched this video, if you're looking for where you can find Kat, you'll find her information in the information section of this video. And again, thank you, Kat, for talking with me today.
Thank you as well. This was really fun.
And for everybody watching, I love you. Mwah. Blessed be everyone.